My ultra-wealthy boss tried to publicly humiliate me in front of the entire office, thinking her money and power gave her the right to treat people like dirt. So I struck back, exposing her lies and humiliating her in return. I thought that was the end of it, but I underestimated just how vindictive the rich can be. She got her revenge in ways I never saw coming, and I learned firsthand how cruel the wealthy can truly be when their pride is wounded. When I was 21, I landed my first job as a nanny, but not just any nanny. I was caring for a family so wealthy they belonged in the top 1%, working 12-hour shifts every day. The family trusted me completely. After just a few weeks, they even stopped hiding their expensive jewelry and left me alone in the house without watching the security cameras. One day, the mother, Linda, asked if I could organize a party for her. She offered to pay me $800, and I accepted immediately. She mentioned I could attend too, but only if I kept my job a secret. It struck me as odd, but I went along with it, especially since I'd never had a boyfriend and secretly hoped to meet a rich, handsome guy. The weeks leading up to the party were exhausting. I felt like I was planning a wedding, meticulously coordinating every detail from the flowers and their containers to the outdoor umbrella, glassware, and even the color schemes. While I was busy setting everything up, I'd occasionally overhear Linda on the phone, bragging about how effortlessly she managed to raise 3 kids and still plan such an elegant event. Her friends always sounded impressed, which both irritated and fascinated me. I shrugged it off. After all, the money was incredible. But as the party drew near, Linda's behavior started to change. She went from being the kind, soft-spoken woman I'd known to someone barking orders at me and even throwing a water bottle when I wasn't setting the table fast enough. One day, the children came to me in tears, asking why their mom was suddenly so mean. That was my cue. Linda's attitude wasn't just in my head. I managed to calm them down with some silly antics, and the issue disappeared for a while. I still remember the day of the party vividly. Wearing my $300 dress with perfectly coordinated shoes and jewelry, I felt like a princess as I pulled up to the mansion. A crowd of people in expensive suits and elegant dresses mingled under dazzling chandeliers, surrounded by tables laden with gourmet food. Then Linda came up to me, tension still evident in her eyes despite a forced smile, and introduced me to her friends. Everything was smooth until there was a lull in the conversation right when Linda started cracking jokes about one of her friends, Lily, who had her first child over 2 years ago and still couldn't manage basic tasks like changing a diaper. The room erupted in laughter, and although I forced a laugh to be polite, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in an awkward, unfair moment. Linda kept going, joking about how she couldn't even stop her kids from crying without calling her nanny, and even reminding everyone of that time I had to pick up when her regular nanny didn't answer the phone. The teasing escalated until her friends were all in stitches, and Linda began hurling insults at me, calling me lazy and useless. When the spotlight shifted back to her and she boasted about how her parenting classes had finally paid off, I excused myself to check on the kids. As I played with them, I made some silly faces that made 2 of them laugh, but the third felt left out and burst into tears, prompting the other 2 to cry too. I casually mentioned, "Hey Linda, your kids are crying. Why don't you show us what those parenting classes taught you?" Her eyes went wide with panic as nearly half the party watched her scramble to comfort them, lifting one child and swinging him as if to distract him. The resulting chaos was both hilarious and heartbreaking, all while a smirk crept onto my face. After that, things took a surprising turn. Linda's guests started praising me for handling the situation so well. One after another, they approached, asking if I'd consider nannying for them, offering 2 or 3 times what Linda paid me. I was thrilled by the prospects, but I soon learned that Linda wasn't ready to let me go that easily. The day after the party, I woke up to 3 missed calls and a simple text from Linda, "You're fired. Return the house key today." I wasn't shocked, this had been coming. However, later that afternoon, as I arrived at the lobby of my apartment building, I was met by a delivery man bearing an enormous arrangement of exotic flowers. The card read, "Loved your style last night. Let's talk opportunities. Madison Montgomery," and it included a phone number. Madison had been one of the impeccably dressed women at the party, dripping in diamonds, enough to put my entire college education cost into perspective. As I weighed my options, things escalated further. Linda began spreading damaging rumors among the wealthy community, alleging that I had stolen a piece of jewelry, a pendant, from her master bedroom. My friend Sophia, who worked as a personal assistant for another family in the same circle, texted me, "Everyone's talking about the pendant you supposedly took from Linda's master bedroom." My heart pounded. I'd never even touched her jewelry. I called Linda immediately, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and fear. Her response was eerily sweet, explaining that misunderstandings happen, but then she dropped the bomb. She'd already filed a police report, as required by her insurance. This wasn't just about firing me now, she was trying to ruin my reputation and possibly get me arrested. In my panic, I called Madison, who answered on the first ring as though she'd been waiting for my call. "I've been expecting to hear from you," she said calmly. Madison explained that Linda was predictable when her ego got bruised. She invited me to meet for lunch the next day at a restaurant I recognized from celebrity gossip magazines. That night, I meticulously documented every piece of evidence from my time with Linda, screenshots of texts where she praised my work with the kids, and photos with timestamps and locations. The following morning, I dressed in the best outfit I owned, though it felt painfully modest compared to the party attire. Arriving at the restaurant, the doorman eyed my non-designer look suspiciously until I mentioned Madison's name. I found Madison seated in a corner table, sporting sunglasses indoors and a casual outfit worth more than 3 months' rent. As she sipped her sparkling water, she explained that Linda had already called everyone from the party, painting me as a thief who manipulated her children. Madison revealed that she ran a high-end staffing agency for elite families, placing nannies, housekeepers, and personal assistants, and that she had been watching me closely at the party. "You handled the children beautifully and stood up to Linda with class," she commended, and then offered me a job with one of her client families at nearly triple what Linda had paid me. There was just one condition: I needed to clear my name first, and Madison already had a plan. What followed was a crash course in how the wealthy settle their disputes. Madison introduced me to her friend Aiden, a lawyer who normally charges $1,000 an hour but agreed to help me for the thrill of watching Linda squirm. Together, they drafted a cease and desist letter addressing the false accusations, demanding a written retraction be sent out to all of Linda's high society contacts. To my surprise, Linda caved almost immediately, sending a group email claiming there had been a misunderstanding and that the missing jewelry was safely located in her safe. Yet, the damage to my reputation lingered, and Linda wasn't finished with me. My new position with the Harrington family, clients with twin 4-year-olds, had been going wonderfully for 2 weeks when Mrs. Harrington pulled me aside one morning with a worried look. She handed me printed screenshots from social media that showed posts of alleged drug use, explicit content, and even racist comments from accounts seemingly tied to me. My stomach dropped. The posts were sophisticated fakes using my photos, but were entirely fabricated. It reeked of Linda's handiwork, though proving it would be nearly impossible. Unlike Linda, Mrs. Harrington was kind enough to listen to my explanation, and she agreed to give me time to sort the situation out. I immediately called Madison, who sighed deeply at what I described, a classic Linda move. She then told me to meet her at a small, unmarked office building downtown. And that's where things stand. I met DT, a former hacker who now leads a respected cybersecurity firm devoted to the privacy needs of the ultra-wealthy. DT was surprisingly young, probably in her early 30s, with electric blue hair and more tattoos than bare skin. "Rich problems need rich solutions," she joked as she set out to trace the fake posts and gather evidence of their fabrication. Within a day, she confirmed that the posts had been created via a VPN and uncovered enough digital clues to indicate that someone had accessed them from Linda's home network. Though it wasn't enough to pursue legal action, it was sufficient for Madison's purposes. The next phase of Madison's plan revealed the true hierarchy of power among the wealthy. She organized a lunch with several women from our circle, including Molly Westfield, who, I learned, was married to the CEO of the bank holding the mortgage on Linda's husband's investment properties. Over elegant salads and sparkling water, Madison casually mentioned the troubling behavior Linda had exhibited. Molly appeared particularly worried, mentioning that her husband was even considering changing their banking partners due to concerns about certain clients' characters. A chill ran down my spine as I realized these women weren't merely exchanging gossip, they were methodically dismantling Linda's social and financial ties. By the end of lunch, plans were already in motion to exclude Linda from 3 upcoming charity events, which in their world was equivalent to social death. Meanwhile, the Harringtons decided to keep me on board after DT provided an in-depth analysis proving the fake social media posts. Their trust meant everything to me, and I threw myself into caring for their twins with renewed dedication. 2 months passed in relative calm as I adapted to my new role, which included trips with the Harringtons to their Hamptons vacation home and Vermont ski chalet. The pay was excellent, the family respectful, and Madison had become somewhat of a mentor. I almost forgot about Linda until one sunny afternoon at the local park, a fancy, members-only space with tight security for wealthy families, where I noticed Linda with her 3 children. Our eyes locked in a tense moment of recognition. In an instant, her expression changed from shock to fury, and she hurried over with her kids. What followed demonstrated the cold, calculated nature of wealthy revenge. Instead of creating a scene, Linda greeted me with an overly warm smile, as if we were old friends. She then bent down to speak to the Harrington twins, her voice sugary as she said, "Hello, darlings. Did you know your nanny once took care of my children, too? Would you like to hear a secret about her?" Before I could step in, she whispered something to them that widened their eyes in amazement. Then she straightened, shot me a venomous smile, and left with her children. That evening, Mrs. Harrington called me into her study with a troubled look. "The twins told me something concerning today," she began, and my heart sank as she repeated what Linda had told them, that I had been fired from her home for touching things that didn't belong to me, and that I made her children cry on purpose. Mrs. Harrington didn't seem entirely convinced, but I could see the seeds of doubt taking root. The trust one had worked so hard to build was crumbling. I called Madison in tears, explaining what had occurred. Her response was immediate and firm: "It's time to end this." The next day, Madison introduced me to Sage Donovan, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with steely gray hair and piercing eyes. I learned that Sage was the fixer hired by the wealthy to make problems disappear quietly. "I don't do anything illegal," she quickly clarified, "but I do know everyone's secrets." Sage explained that she'd been keeping files on Linda and her husband for years, initially on behalf of a client who was considering a business deal with him. What she revealed next stunned me. Linda's husband had been hiding assets in anticipation of a divorce, and Linda herself was having an affair with her personal trainer. "Information is currency," Sage said evenly as she slid a USB drive over to Madison. "Use it wisely." Madison's plan was as elegant as it was simple. She organized a small dinner party at her penthouse, inviting the Harringtons, Linda, her husband, and several key figures from our social circle. I attended not as a nanny but as Madison's assistant, dressed in a borrowed designer outfit and fully briefed on proper conduct. The evening went smoothly until dessert, when Madison steered the conversation toward loyalty. "I've always believed that the way someone treats the people who work for them reveals their true character," she said, looking directly at Linda. She cited examples, falsely accusing a former employee of theft or fabricating evidence to ruin their reputation, and then presented DT's proof of the fake social posts. Finally, she turned to Linda's husband and Robert, asking if Linda had been as dishonest with them as she had been with everyone else at the table. The dinner turned into a carefully orchestrated demolition. Madison revealed just enough about the affair and the financial deceit to send both Linda and her husband into panic, each suddenly more intent on self-protection than on attacking me. The Harringtons watched the drama unfold, their eyes wide with shock, and Mrs. Harrington occasionally glanced at me with a new understanding. By the end of the night, Linda and her husband had left separately, Linda in tears, and Robert, her husband, seething with cold anger. The following week was a maelstrom. Robert filed for divorce, triggering investigations into the very assets Linda had been trying to conceal, while the personal trainer's wife went public with the affair, sparking a scandal that dominated local gossip. True to her word, Madison had terminated Linda's vendetta against me. Linda became too preoccupied with salvaging her marriage, reputation, and financial status to continue her campaign. The Harringtons, now fully aware of the truth, apologized for doubting me and even gave me a generous bonus as a show of goodwill. Just when I thought calm had returned, I received a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea who you're messing with. This isn't over." The message was accompanied by a photo of me entering my apartment building, clearly taken that same day. Shaken, I showed the message to Madison, who immediately arranged for a security expert named Nova to inspect my apartment. Nova soon discovered 2 hidden cameras, one in the living room and another in the hallway. "Professional installation," she murmured as she removed them, noting that someone had spent a serious amount on this setup. The invasion of privacy left me terrified, my sleep disrupted, constantly startled by every shadow. Madison insisted I temporarily move into her guest apartment while Nova's team conducted a thorough sweep and secured my home. During this time, Madison shared more about her own past. She had once been in a similar position, working for a wealthy family that had tried to ruin her when she resisted the husband's advances. "Rich people think their money makes them untouchable," she explained, "until they meet someone who's smarter or has more resources." A week later, things escalated dramatically. I was assisting the Harrington twins with an art project when Mrs. Harrington rushed in, her face drained of color. "There's a police officer here," she whispered in shock. "He says they're investigating you for stalking and threatening Linda's family." The officer maintained a professional yet firm tone as he explained that Linda had filed a restraining order against me based on several threatening emails and alleged sightings of someone matching my description. Once again, I was being framed, but this time with potentially serious legal consequences. The Harringtons stood by me, providing an alibi for several incidents, while Madison immediately activated her network. She called Aiden, the lawyer, and Nova, the security expert, to start building my defense. DT quickly analyzed the suspicious emails and determined they had been sent using a sophisticated spoofing technique to appear as if they came from my account. None of us expected the situation to take another twist when Robert, Linda's husband, contacted Madison directly. "Linda's gone too far," he confided during a private meeting I was allowed to attend. "She's not just targeting you anymore. She's having me followed, threatening to expose financial secrets to the IRS, and I believe she's the one who planted those cameras in your apartment." His main concern, naturally, was protecting himself, as Linda had become a dangerous liability. Robert even provided evidence that Linda had hired a private investigator who specialized in surveillance and digital framing. With this evidence, combined with DT's findings, it became possible to have the restraining order dismissed and to pursue charges against Linda for filing a false police report. But the nightmare wasn't over. One evening, returning home from work, I found my apartment door ajar. My heart raced as I called Nova before stepping inside. When she arrived, she and a team of security personnel thoroughly cleared the premises. Inside, the apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, walls slashed, and chillingly, threatening messages scrawled in what looked like red paint across my bedroom wall. The police were skeptical when I suggested Linda was responsible. They argued that a woman of her stature wouldn't typically commit burglary and vandalism herself. What they didn't understand was how obsession can push even the most privileged to desperate measures. Security footage from the building had been mysteriously corrupted during the break-in, although a neighbor reported seeing a woman in a headscarf and large sunglasses hurrying away at the time. The description vaguely matched Linda, though it wasn't enough for a firm identification. By this point, Madison had reached her limit. "This ends now," she declared, leaving no room for doubt about her determination to stop this cycle of revenge and deceit. She announced that she was about to use what she called her nuclear option. She explained that their social circle secretly operated under the control of an informal yet influential group, old money families whose opinions determined who belonged and who was shunned. Madison had always stayed out of their affairs, considering them too extreme, until Linda's behavior became too rampant to ignore. 3 days later, I was invited as Madison's guest to a charity gala held at the mansion of the Blackwells, an older couple whose family had once owned a significant piece of Manhattan. The lavish setting made Linda's modest residence seem ordinary by comparison. Linda and Robert were there too, though they arrived separately. Throughout the evening, I witnessed Linda being steadily marginalized. People would cut off conversations as soon as she came near and excuse themselves whenever she tried to join any group. Madison later confided that word had spread about Linda's erratic behavior, not as idle gossip, but as a genuine safety concern. "This circle won't tolerate unpredictability," Madison whispered. "They might overlook greed, secrets, or even minor crimes if done discreetly, but wild, escalating behavior that could draw unwanted attention is absolutely unforgivable." The tension peaked when Mrs. Blackwell, a small but commanding woman in her 70s, addressed the crowd during her speech. Without naming anyone, she emphasized the importance of proper conduct and warned that those unable to uphold basic decency would find themselves unwelcome in refined society. Her stern gaze landed on Linda, sparking an immediate, palpable discomfort that had several guests physically backing away as though they were afraid of catching her disgrace. By the end of the night, Linda was entirely ostracized. I almost felt sympathy for her until I remembered the cameras in my apartment, the burglary, and the bogus police report. Linda's face as she walked out alone, a blend of fury, humiliation, and the dawning realization that she had lost everything important, will haunt me forever. I assumed this was where Linda would withdraw to nurse her wounds and sort out her divorce, I thought, but I was completely mistaken. 3 days after the event, I got an unexpected call from Madison early in the morning. "Check your email," she said, her tone tight with worry. In my inbox was a message from an anonymous sender that included a video file. When I watched it, I felt physically sick. The clip was a meticulously edited montage that purportedly showed me mistreating the Harrington twins, shouting at them, roughly handling them, leaving them to cry. The footage was a product of sophisticated deepfake technology, blending actual security camera footage from the Harrington home with altered images and audio. A simple note accompanied it. This material would be sent to both the police and the Harringtons in 24 hours unless I publicly admitted to fabricating all claims against Linda. I immediately forwarded everything to Madison, DT, and Aiden. My hands trembled so much that I could barely use my phone. Within an hour, they gathered at Madison's apartment. DT confirmed that the video was crafted using professional-grade deepfake techniques that would take experts significant time and resources to debunk. "This isn't some amateur job," she said grimly. "Clearly, someone paid a lot for this." The looming 24-hour deadline only complicated matters further. Aiden urged us to alert the Harringtons immediately, fearing they'd be caught off guard. When we showed them the footage, Mrs. Harrington broke down in tears, not out of belief in its accuracy, but from sheer horror at its realistic appearance. Mr. Harrington kept repeating our own security footage, baffled at how someone could breach their supposedly secure system. Then came the final twist about the wealthy world that I hadn't yet grasped. When truly backed into a corner, they don't always play fair. Madison made a call to someone she simply referred to as an old friend, alluding vaguely to needing the kind of help we discussed after the Marseilles incident. 2 hours later, a man named Drax arrived at her apartment. Dressed in a flawless suit and speaking with a refined accent, he seemed to belong in their world, yet there was a hardness in his eyes hinting at experiences far beyond mere luxury. Drax carefully reviewed all the evidence we had on Linda's increasing campaign of harassment, drilling into details about her routines, her current living arrangements, now that she and Robert were separated, and who had access to her accounts and devices. Then he left with a simple, "I'll handle this." I never learned exactly what Drax did, but that evening brought swift and disastrous consequences for Linda. An email from the anonymous account arrived later that same evening with the message, "I withdraw my threat and any further action against you. This matter is now concluded." The next day, Linda suddenly sold her house, pulled her children out of their exclusive private school, and as Madison later learned from her sources, moved to a small town in Oregon where she had relatives. Meanwhile, Robert, now proceeding with an uncontested divorce, told acquaintances that Linda had suffered a health crisis that forced a complete lifestyle overhaul. The elite community accepted his explanation without question, and the scandal was quickly replaced by even newer gossip. No charges were ever brought against Linda, no public accusations made. She simply vanished from the social scene as if she'd never existed. In the aftermath, I continued my work for the Harringtons, who had stood by me through everything. Madison evolved from a mentor to a genuine friend, occasionally inviting me to gatherings where I began to understand the unspoken rules and subtle power dynamics within their world. I never saw Linda again, although every now and then I'd get a notification that someone from Oregon had viewed my social media profiles. It reminded me that the secrets of the rich were not so different from anyone else's: infidelity, insecurity, financial woes, family issues, just with extra zeros and more resources to keep them hidden. Their real fear, however, isn't losing money but losing their status and being ostracized by the very circles that define their worth. They'll go to nearly any extreme to avoid that fall, even if it means destroying someone like me who accidentally looked behind the curtain. Sometimes at night, I still check my apartment for cameras and sleep with one eye open, wondering if Linda would ever return to settle things. Then I remember Madison's words: once people like Linda lose everything, they rarely have the means, financially, socially, or emotionally, to come back and seek revenge. Instead, they find smaller circles where they can feel important again. I hope she's right, but my experiences with the secrets of the wealthy have taught me that nothing is ever truly over until they decide so. I sat with my phone in hand for several minutes, lost in thought. My apartment felt emptier than ever, and the silence was starting to get to me. I shook my head, grabbed my keys, and decided I needed some fresh air. The building's elevator was out yet again, so I took the stairs 2 at a time. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face, which felt refreshing after being cooped up all day. I began walking with no specific destination. The neighborhood had changed since I moved in. Old diners had given way to trendy coffee shops and upscale boutiques where family-owned stores once stood. I passed a group of laughing college students who looked carefree, and I couldn't recall the last time I felt that free. Then my phone buzzed. It was Madison calling. I almost didn't pick up, but given how often she'd been right, I accepted the call. By the time I said hello, she was already speaking about new documents she'd found, mentioning something about Linda's offshore accounts. I told her I needed a break from all this chaos. After a moment of silence, she understood, and we agreed to meet the next day instead. I ended the call and kept walking until I reached the local park, which was nearly empty at this hour, save for a few dog walkers and a couple sitting on a bench. Finding a quiet spot under a tree, I sat down on the damp grass and let my thoughts wander back to everything that had happened. It all began 6 months ago with an email, a simple message from an unknown sender that included an attachment which changed everything. It contained financial records alleging that Linda's company was misappropriating client funds. At first, I couldn't believe it. Linda was my mentor, my boss, someone I deeply trusted. I deleted the email, but 3 days later, another arrived, then another, each one offering more damning details. Eventually, I showed everything to Madison, our firm's compliance officer. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she'd had her doubts for months. We spent weeks gathering more evidence, often meeting in secret locations like parking garages and copying files under the cover of darkness. The whole affair felt straight out of a thriller movie, except it was all too real. When we finally presented the evidence to the board, they were skeptical at first. After all, Linda was respected, powerful, and well-connected. Yet, the facts were indisputable. The board called an emergency meeting, and when Linda arrived, confident as always, she ended up leaving in shambles. The company announced her resignation the very next day. The SEC launched an investigation a week later, and her assets were frozen while her reputation crumbled along with her friendships. I watched someone I once admired unravel before my eyes. It wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. It was just plain sad. I stepped outside as a sudden rain began to fall, each drop mirroring my inner turmoil. I knew I should head home, so I brushed the rain from my face and gathered my things. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I nearly ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. There was silence, a small sound of breathing, and then a click before the call abruptly ended, likely a wrong number, yet it left me feeling unsettled. I quickened my pace toward my apartment. However, as soon as I reached the building, I sensed something was off. My door stood ajar, a sight that froze me in place. I never leave my door open, so I hesitated and then cautiously pushed it open. The lights were off, and when I reached for the switch, nothing happened. The power was out. Using my phone's flashlight, I scanned the room and immediately noticed that my case files were scattered across the floor, my laptop was missing, and the drawer where I kept my backup drives was open and empty. It was clear that someone had been looking for something specific. I backed away quickly and called Madison, describing what I'd seen while glancing into the stairwell. She answered immediately and instructed me in hushed tones to leave the building, meet her at our backup location, and avoid talking to anyone. I left the apartment and descended the stairs, the doorman's surprised glance following my hurried exit. Muttering something about an urgent meeting, I hurried out into the street. The rain had stopped, leaving wet, reflective roads behind. I kept glancing over my shoulder, wary of any suspicious movements. Changing streets a few times and taking multiple turns through alleys and past a 24-hour diner, I made sure I wasn't being tailed. Finally, I arrived at the backup spot, a storage unit Madison had set up under a fake name for emergencies like this. Tucked away in a quiet commercial area devoid of most businesses at this hour, I entered the unit using the key she'd given me, managing to unlock the padlock that was stiff from disuse. Inside, Madison was already waiting, her laptop open and illuminated by a small battery-powered lantern. With a grim expression, she wasted no time showing me new findings. Linda had another offshore account we hadn't discovered, a significant one in the Cayman Islands. The money trail led to some very troubling destinations, places where you didn't want to owe favors to individuals who could permanently resolve problems. My own break-in now seemed like a warning or perhaps even the first move against us. Madison had wisely moved her crucial documents to this location days earlier, anticipating that this might happen. Her ability to think several steps ahead was exactly why she was still enscathed in this ruthless game. We spent the next hour meticulously planning our next moves. We agreed that it was time to disappear for a while, to let things cool off. Although we had already backed up all our evidence securely and the authorities had what they needed, our role in the drama was over. Madison had cash ready, burner phones, prepaid cards, and even fake IDs. I was both impressed and a little terrified by how prepared she was. We decided to go our separate ways to become harder to trace, 2 moving targets meeting again in 2 weeks at a predetermined spot. Until then, we would keep contact to a strict minimum and forego all electronic communications, using only old-school methods. I left first. The night air now felt charged with danger, every shadow a potential threat. I walked 6 blocks before hailing a taxi, giving the driver an address in a different part of town. I watched the rearview mirror the entire ride, relieved when no suspicious vehicles were in sight. I paid in cash and continued on foot. My motel was exactly the kind of place where no one asked questions, a faded sign, a cracked parking lot, and weekly rates that made it easy to blend in. I checked in using one of the fake names on the ID that Madison had provided, paying up front for 3 nights. The room reeked of old cigarette smoke and cheap cleaning products. The bed sagged in the middle and the television only offered 4 channels. It was perfect for staying off the radar. That night, I barely slept. A single creak in the hallway made me jump, and every sound outside my window put me on edge. Morning eventually broke after what felt like an eternity, and I knew I couldn't stay in one place for long. I quickly showered in lukewarm water, dressed in the clothes I'd grabbed at the storage unit, and checked out early. The front desk clerk barely glanced up from his phone as I left. I wandered 3 blocks to a bus stop, hopped on the first bus bound anywhere, just anywhere away from here, and mingled with regular folks heading to their everyday jobs. I envied their normal lives, free from these extraordinary troubles. Once downtown, I bought an inexpensive baseball cap from a tourist shop and later stopped at a diner with dim lighting and a discreet back exit. I ordered coffee and eggs, keeping an eye on the street through the window, reassured by the lack of any familiar faces or undue attention. The waitress refilled my coffee without needing to ask, and I left a generous tip, no reason to draw attention by being stingy. Over the next week, I kept moving within the city, never staying in one place more than a night and always paying with cash. I was constantly on alert, ready to run at the slightest hint of trouble. One day, I called Madison from a payphone for our scheduled check-in. The call lasted only 30 seconds, just enough to confirm we were both okay, but too brief to leave a trace. On day 9, I spotted him. The doorman from my building was sitting across from the coffee shop where I had been. He was casually looking at storefronts, but his eyes kept darting about, as if searching for someone likely me. I left my coffee half-finished, slipped out the back through the kitchen, ignoring shouts from the staff, and made my way through an alley and out of a department store via a side exit. I then caught a subway heading north, transferred to a bus going east, and walked south for an hour, despite my aching feet and frayed nerves. But I remained free and on the move. Eventually, I checked into another motel in a completely different area of town, registering under a new name to stay off the grid.